administration lacks mandatory recall authority. They lack it in foods and they lack it in drugs. That is actually, however, proposed in the presidential work plan. It's also proposed in quite a number of bills in Congress. I think if you look at the president's plan as the left wall of food safety, in this case food safety, but also drug safety conceptually, then I think that you will most likely see in a food safety, drug safety bill the authority for the agency to mandate a recall. And that's really the issue, is that the agency for years has been relying upon the cooperation of the industry to voluntarily pull these products off the market, and that's where you can run into these delays. And so under the president's plan, the proposal is that, in fact, the agency would be able to mandate that recall and affect that recall and force the company to do it. So I think that's actually going to be resolved eventually, because both the administration and the democratically controlled Congress have those elements in many of the plans.
Tampa, Florida. Go ahead.
Yes, good morning, and thank you for Cspan. I have a specific question. If an individual like I have a prescription medication and would like to have it tested to see if the medication is what they say it is, where would I go about having it tested locally, or for that matter anywhere in the nation, if I wanted to take my prescription and find out whether it truly was the medication that the doctor ordered and not specifically placebo or something like that, or even no matter where it was made, where would I have it taken? Do you get my point?
I do, and there are you could go on the internet and find private labs that will perform that testing, and these are high quality, respectable laboratories that perform testing exactly like that. And so I mean I would just encourage you to go on to a search engine and put in appropriate search terms in order to track down a lab that can do it. Interestingly enough, if you take a prescription drug and you test it for identity or potency, in other words, you're looking for the active ingredient to see if it's present, and then you're looking for the strength to make certain that it's present at the labeled amount. You will, I'm sure you'll find that the prescription drugs that are in this country have both the active and they have it at the appropriate strength. Some of the questions that have come up in oversight, however, have to do with the concern that that active ingredient came from an appropriate source, and that's where you come back to the import issue, and that is that about 80% of the drugs consumed in this country are either manufactured in whole overseas, or at least manufactured in part, and the active ingredient is manufactured overseas and brought into the country. And so this then harkens back to the need for the FDA to be into those facilities, not just for the approval aspects, but to be back there and make certain that the facilities are properly manufacturing the products, that they're properly sourcing active ingredients, and then they're confirming that when it gets to the border level, and they don't have to try to do so much at the border, at the gate, because you just bottleneck it. And with the volume, the agency is not going to be able to distinguish between good products and bad products without that background data. But you certainly can find on the internet labs that can do that for you.
When it comes to inspection, do we apply the same scrutiny that we do to overseas products to products that we get from Canada or Mexico?
The answer is yes. Now, only because the system is a uniform system. So the electronic data that comes into the agency before a shipment arrives is the same data set. It's the same elements in that data transaction, regardless of the source. Because Canada and Mexico are close to us, the agency is able to get into those facilities more readily. And I also would say that particularly along the southwest border, FDA is literally standing next to Customs, who is literally standing next to USDA, and so you really have a much more integrated team approach in dealing with cargo coming from the Mexican side. The Canadian side, it's a little looser when it comes to the border transactions, except for the bridges, Peace Bridge, the Detroit bridges, and Buffalo bridges. They are also working very, very closely with the other agencies, but. Consequently, there tends to be more hands-on at those border levels, at those land borders, rather than, for instance, the seaports and the airports, because the agency may or may not be. It could be 2 hours away from the port, and so you definitely have a coverage. And some of that's resources, just not having the bodies to be able to have offices co-located with customs. But co-location is actually a part of the action plan to drive FDA and the safety agencies out to where the transactions are occurring and out where customs is and out where the other agencies in order to integrate the approach.
Next for Ben England, Benjamin England, Edgewood, Maryland.
Yes, good morning, Mr. England.
Good morning.
2 points I'd like to make. The famous Consumer Protection Agency, which is headed or was headed by Ms. Nord, I presume she's been fired already, who made some somewhat really strange statements. On the one hand, she stated that our budget had been badly cut under this administration, but then admitted that they were able to do the job anyway. And I think she mentioned that just one person was handling the toys that were coming in from China. And I haven't heard anything about the conclusion of that. The other point I want to make is the Vioxx, in which a company, Merck, sold Vioxx after they knew that it had problems with heart conditions. Now, they just settled in a class action suit for $5 billion roughly, which, according to what the reporter said, would amount to maybe $100,000 per person. Now, one would hope that these people, having concealed the dangers of Vioxx and wondering where the FDA was involved, although I know the FDA relies on the companies to do the testing, but in this case, why is there no criminal case being brought against Merck?
A criminal case is going to require the government to prove that the defendant, whether it's a corporation or if it's a person working in a corporation or someone who's responsible for conduct, intended to defraud or mislead. And as far as why the government decides to bring one case and not the other, I can't speak to that. As far as the Consumer Product Safety Commission question, on the one hand, the budget has been badly slashed, according to Ms. Nord, Commissioner Nord, and yet they feel like they have the resources. This is a dance that I think happens in all administrations. Whenever the priority issues are funded, and in many respects issues that are not priority on the front end but may become priority because of a crisis may not be funded in the beginning, and then they receive funding on the backside. I would also note that this is an historical problem with FDA. I think the numbers are that if you compare FDA's budget to CDC's budget and NIH's budget, FDA's budget has lagged over the last 20 years. You can see it from 1986 on, and to the point where it's essentially kind of dangling off of HHS's budgetary considerations, and the CDC and NIH are receiving substantially more resources. And so it's not just this administration. I mean, this has been an historical issue for the agency, obtaining sufficient resources. I don't know CPSC nearly as well, but I think what you're hearing is kind of that classic dance of we can do more with less. And I don't think that that's the answer anymore. I don't think FDA can do more with less. I don't think CPSC can do more with less, and I think everybody is realizing that. The question then becomes, well, how do they fund it?
2 more calls. Earl to New York. Go ahead.
Good morning, Pedro.
You're on, sir. Go ahead.
Yes, good morning, Pedro. How are you today?
Fine, thank you.
All righty. Thank you, Mr. England, for all the insight that you're providing this morning. I'm a first-time caller. My concern is that you're saying we may be too early, and you've said it a couple of times. That confuses me when we're dealing with public safety, being proactive and stating that this has been an ongoing issue. Why are our legislators really taking a proactive approach in dealing with this issue?
Very good question. I think I didn't mean to imply that we're too early in solving the problem. What I meant to say was that when you look at the plan that the President has put out, it doesn't discuss resource needs.